Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone. And welcome to the Snack Covenant, episode 293. And today, we're going to discuss Marika and Radagon.
Or are they the one person?
Or are they Maragon or Radika?
But that's their celebrity power couple name.
Yes.
Yeah.
If people wanted to know what's up with Radagon and Marika, why didn't they just ask the little slug who cannot tell a lie?
So, welcome to everyone who's listening to this for the first time. This topic stuck out to me because I remember when that E3 2019 trailer dropped. I was the one, predictably, saying, hey, what if that character is gender fluid and keeps switching between male and female? And that is kind of what happened. Everything else I predicted was wrong, but that worked. And I'm clinging to that as my one Elden Ring prediction that actually worked.
So, Sophie.
Yeah.
Radagon and Marika, tell me more.
So we're going to start now by just basically saying, okay, this is what we're going to be saying in this, and then we'll explain what we mean after that. So this is, I guess it's the topic sentence, if you want. Radagon and Marika, at some point, were two different people. At some point in the reasonably recent past, after the sort of big world-shaping events happened, after that point, they did actually fuse into one being. This has something to do with the way that Marika is related to the Golden Order. It's to do with the Golden Order having all these underlying concepts of which the game is calling Regression and Causality. No, this is great. He's gonna have to do all of it again.
Hello there. It's From Software president and co-creator of Elden Ring, Hidetaka Miyazaki here. Me and the boys were just pranking Yui by pouring water on his hard drive when I got a note from Sin that says, could you explain the principles of causality and regression? So, causality and regression is when Dark Souls 3 is inexplicably well received, causing Bandai Namco to ask you to please regress away from Sekiro and Derasine and remake Demon's Souls for the fourth fucking time. At this point, I was a little concerned that the formula was becoming stale, so I asked to work with another writer. They said yes. I suggested Amano Akira, the author of Kitekyo Hitman Reborn. They said no. In retrospect, that this was the right decision. I had no ideas. I just wanted her to officially canonize my OC, Garbaggio. In the end, I was extremely happy to work with my fifth choice, George R.R. Martin. George came up with a family tree where everyone had the same name. I stole some stuff from 1980s role-playing games, and 12 million people bought it. Sin also wants me to say hello to everybody who is new. Everyone who has already stopped listening, I've seen your fucking retention rate.
We start the Radagon Marika story by talking to a giant turtle in a Pope's hat.
Named Muriel.
And he gives us this, very sort of basic, 101, here's who Radagon is. Mm-hmm. So Radagon is one of Queen Marika's basically generals. He just calls him a champion, but he's described as being the commander of this big golden army. And he marries the Queen of Caria, who is called Ranala. Then Queen Marika, her husband at the time, whose name is Godfrey, he is basically kicked out. He's kicked out of the lands between because he loses the gold in his eyes. He becomes the first of the Tarnished. I think he's the first Tarnished ever. There maybe, I don't know exactly who was first, but he sounds like he was the first one. He becomes Tarnished. The rest of the Tarnished, along with him, they're all basically exiled because they're no longer, the grace of gold is no longer with them. So when that happens, Marika recalls Radagon to her, and they get married.
Right.
And Muriel's like, yeah, that was really weird. Because he's like, I don't quite understand why that happened. Renala was completely heartbroken that her husband was taken from her, and Muriel straight up says, like, I don't understand to this day why Marika wanted to marry Radagon. Because he wasn't that important. He was basically just one of her generals. Muriel calls him a mere champion. He's like, well, why was she happy with him when there's like demigods walking around? Why you marry this guy?
You know why?
Why?
It's just that Marika really hated Renala.
Such a revenge thing, and she stole her boyfriend.
Yes.
Oh my god. Muriel then, if you continue to discuss Radagon with him, he says, yeah, this other weird thing about Radagon is that Radagon was having a big statue of himself made by a sculptor. And Muriel's wording is the sculptor glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. So Radagon had a secret. But it's not clear at this point what it was. But Radagon had some kind of secret, and it's something to do with this big statue of him that was made.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like it for a while. This comes back when we finally reach Leyndell, which is the capital city of Lands Between. It's where, like, Marika lived. It's where the Erd Tree is. It's where Radagon lives as well. So we find the big statue of Radagon.
Yeah.
And it does nothing. It's a statue.
Okay, I have a funny joke.
Okay.
Remember Gentleman of Luck?
No.
When they're like, we're gonna meet at the statue. And then the guy's like, okay, but is the statue sitting or standing? And then the second guy replies, it's a statue. Who's gonna make him sit? But in Russian, it
Is
has
that okay, I assume it's very funny in Russian. Hello, Ilana the Squalid Queen here, just laughing along with Sin's very funny Russian joke. You know, jokes like that are the kind of jokes the cable companies don't want you to hear. That's why I launched my new video streaming app, Ilana. Ilana is home to literally dozens of great Soviet comedies, the distribution rights of which are a complete mess. You'll laugh along with Ivan Vasilovich changes his profession, the peculiarities of national fishing, and of course the feasts of Belshazzar. Streamed directly from satellite, you can think of Ilana as cable TV without the cable. But hurry, because the servers are going to shut down in about 5 minutes. Oh, they're gone. They're gone. You know, that's what happens when you're too ahead of the curve. The statue on its own does nothing, but there is a miracle we can get, an incantation, that is called the Law of Regression. So the Law of Regression, it's one of the two sort of founding principles of the Golden Order, which is the sort of unifying worldview that is being enforced upon the Lands Between at the moment. So the idea is the Golden Order has two principles. One is called regression, one is called causality. We will talk about that later on. But as far as all that matters now is Law of Regression. And one of the descriptions of the Law of Regression is it's like, you know, it has all these healing effects, protection cells, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and it reveals mimicry. What it does is if you use Law of Regression in front of that statue, it shifts to become a statue of Marika. And you get a little note that says, Radagon is Marika. You can then inform the brilliant Goldmask of this. Goldmask is a guy who doesn't do a lot of talking. He just basically stares and points at things, and his fingers apparently move according to Corin. But basically you can inform Goldmask of this. And Corin, who becomes he's the guy in Round Table Hold who teaches basic incantations. He kind of becomes like Goldmask's interpreter later on. And after you inform Goldmask of this, Corin, who's interpreting Goldmask's movements, says, whoa, wait a minute. Like, Radagon is Marika? Look, I don't know what this means. So, when you finally encounter Radagon / Marika, you do it in the Erd Tree. It's the final encounter of the game. So what happens is you walk inside the Erd Tree and you see Queen Marika, and she's crucified on a shard of the Elden Ring. Her body has crumbled and fallen apart like you see in the trailer. Interestingly, she is pierced. She has this huge, spike that is, driven through her body. It's kind of like a Christ pose, I guess, where he's pierced by the spear on the cross. It's very similar to that. What's notable that becomes important later on is like she doesn't have any gold in her. She just looks like a shattered statue. She breaks from the crucifix thing, rune arc, whatever, and she falls. And she falls behind the sort of the dais where you saw the ring being shattered. And then she gets up, but as she is getting up, she physically transforms into Ratigan.
Right.
Ratigan and her, like, they are sharing a form.
Yes.
So there is some sort of like physical transformation that happens. Like her hair changes, her body changes, and she gets up, and now it's Ratigan. When you defeat Ratigan, Ratigan's body collapses, the Elden Ring escapes, that leads to a really fucking terrible boss fight that goes for 7 minutes if you do it properly. But then, when that's over with, what's left behind is Marika's corpse.
Yeah.
So it goes Marika to Radagon and then back to Marika. And what's important about the ending, if you'd pick one of the, like, fix the Elden Ring endings, is that when you put the head, like Marika's body falls to pieces, when you put it back together, the gold comes back to her. Like, the gold was in Radagon, it got out. And then when you put it back together again, the gold goes back into her. So, like, she's sort of repaired. So those are like the 5 points of what we're shown in game.
Yeah.
We're going to talk now about, like, the history leading up to this point. The lands between have a very complicated and long history, and what we're playing through in Elden Ring is what the game is calling the Age of the Erd Tree. So a bunch of crap happened before, presumably other things will happen after it, but we're going to start with the beginning of the Age of the Erd Tree. That begins with Marika and Godfrey conquering the giants. So when I say Marika and Godfrey, I mean Marika and Godfrey and Godfrey's, like, massive sort of barbarian army. Like, he united all these people to go, and together they all fought the giants and subdued them. We never hear direct dialogue from Queen Marika, but there are what are called the spoken echoes of Marika. So at certain sites of grace, if you rest there with Melina, she will say, oh yeah, I can sense Marika's words here, do you want me to recite them to you? On the basis of these little conversations, you can piece together kind of the story of what happened. So Marika says, "We commend your deeds. Guidance has delivered ye through ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin." So at this point, even though the Age of the Erd Tree hasn't been established, like that's what she means by new epoch, she says, guidance has delivered ye. So they presumably have the guidance of grace is in them. The gold is in them at this point, even though the Erd Tree has not been established as this, like, dominant thing yet. After all this happens, we get another little Marika speech where she says, "I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past." So at this point, Marika is saying, like, all right, we've established the epoch of the Erd Tree. It's a new age. The Golden Order is the dominant thing in the world. Now I am going to try to understand it. That's something we'll come back to later, the notion that the Golden Order, even though people talk about it like it's a sort of a fanatical religion, it's really not. It's something that actively wants to be understood. Like, what the principles of it are a lot more sort of inquisitive and a lot more malleable than you would expect. It's not like a blind faith thing. It's not something that you're just invested in and you believe without questioning it. The Golden Order is something that wants to be understood, it wants to be taken apart, and that's why there are so many characters in Elden Ring that are adherents of the Golden Order, but they all disagree on what they should do. They all disagree on how to fix the Order, what's wrong with the Order. Maybe nothing's wrong with the Order. Maybe the Order needs to change. Lots and lots and lots of different views on that. So, now, some point after that, Godfrey loses his grace. There's 2 references to the time Godfrey lost his grace, and I'm not sure which comes first. So we firstly have a speech from Marika where she says, "My lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed ye will be driven from the lands between, ye will wage war in land afar, Ye will live and ye will die, and then after thy death I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between and brandish the Elden Ring. And that's further elaborated on in like the second reference to this, which is on Godfrey's crown. It's like a list of the things Godfrey accomplished, and it says like, he led war against the giants, he faced the Storm Lord, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, that the hue in Godfrey's eyes faded. So I'm assuming that by the hue in his eyes they mean the gold. And it's interesting that that ties it specifically to his last worthy enemy fell. So it's almost like Marika just waits for him to have basically exhausted his usefulness. He's done everything he can for her, and then she's like, okay, I'm taking your grace away. And she says it in this way that's almost like she's trying to help them in a sense. Like she's saying, like, I want you to fight and die and get stronger and then come back. That's like a question for another day. I think exactly what she was trying to do there. But the point is that, like, Godfrey loses his grace and he leaves. And Godfrey is like a very, very important person. Massive, like, paintings of Godfrey everywhere. He's the father of Godwin. There's this whole dynasty of, like, Godfrey, Godwin, Godfrey, Godric. They don't straight up say it, but he's the father of Morgoth. He's the father of Morg, because they're twins. And presumably there's just a ton of other demigods as well that we don't meet that are, like, of Godfrey's sort of line, because we know it's a fairly long line.
Mm-hmm.
So Godfrey leaves, and the reason I'm highlighting, okay, Godfrey is really important, is because her replacement is Radagon. And like I was talking about when Muriel's describing it, Muriel's a little, like, unsure, because he's like, Radagon wasn't that big a deal. It's odd that he was raised to the level of, like, marrying the literal, like, goddess of the universe. So they get married. This is where, like, the fusion seems to happen, because this is an echo of Marika, and it's an echo of Marika that you hear in her bedroom. So presumably this was, like, when Radagon was called before her, maybe it's their wedding night, something like that, but she says to him, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order. Leal is just an archaic way of saying loyal. Thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us both be shattered, mine other half. So, at some point here, Miquella and Malenia are born. There's an interesting description of Miquella and Malenia. They were chosen to be Empyreans. Empyrean is just the title that is given to the gods that are going to succeed Marika. So the three Empyreans that were shown, it's Miquella, Malenia, and Ranni. So the notion that, like, well, if Empyrean, like, you have to be a descendant of blah, 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 you don't, because Ranni's an Empyrean. Ranni is not a blood relation of Marika at all. She is only related to Marika by marriage. She has nothing to do with her. Like, there's none of Marika's blood in her veins. She's the daughter of Radagon and Rennala, and she becomes Marika's daughter by marriage, but they're not actually, like, they're not blood relatives. So all it means is, like, this is a god that is powerful enough to basically potentially succeed you. The description of them is like, we need new gods for new ages. That on its own is very interesting, because she's Marika the Eternal. She's not supposed to die, she's not supposed to stop, but they start naming successors to her. And they also specify that those successors, they might usher in a new age. That's after the age of the Earth Tree. The reason I'm talking about this is that the description of Miquella and Malenia, it says that they're Empyreans because they're born of one god.
Well, we do know of one god that's made of two people.
Yeah, that's right, what you're saying there, because their parents are Radagon and Marika, and Radagon is Marika. They're the child of one god. The one god that is two people who are fused together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to go back to, like, the little discussion between Marika and Radagon for a second. So she says, thou art yet to become a god. So he's not a god yet. And she says that they're both going to be shattered, and she calls him her other half. So, the big question mark over the timeline is, when did Godwin die? Like, I actually don't know. I think you could probably figure it out. But, like, the whole point is Godwin's death is what leads to the shattering of the Elden Ring.
Sei un sicario immortale dall'aspetto di bambino che cerca di espandere le sue abilità? Non guardare oltre. La prestigiosa Dignity City University offre una varietà di corsi di meditazione, trascrizione ed etica. Candidati oggi. Basta andare su glockenspiromancyacademy.com. glockenspiromancyacademy.com. Cosa stai aspettando? Candidati oggi.
Something a little odd about Elden Ring.
Just one thing.
Just one thing. There's one, everything about this game completely makes sense. Just one little niggle. Elden Ring had 2 very, very flashy CG trailers made.
Yeah.
The second of those ones, it's called the story trailer, and that could easily be the intro to the game. And I'm fairly convinced at some point that was the intro to the game. And also, this story trailer, it came out a couple of months, I think, before the game came out. And it came out on the official Bandai Namco channel. So what I'm establishing here is, as far as I am concerned, that story trailer is, big air quotes, canon. The reason I care about that, because it mentions Godwin dying, and then Rani, who is narrating it, she says, Queen Marika was driven to the brink. So Godwin's death is the catalyst for Marika wanting to break the Elden Ring. It would be an emotional thing, because Godwin was her son.
Yeah.
She's lost her son, who she didn't think she would ever lose. That would drive you to the brink.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, on a less personal level to that, Godwin is the first of the demigods to die. Prior to this, no one thinks they can die. So not only is it a personal tragedy for Marika, it's also this, oh shit moment. Because suddenly, these people who you thought were going to be around forever, they can die now. And on an even more abstract kind of cosmic level, the death of Godwin messes up how death works in the Lands Between. Godwin is killed with a fragment of the Rune of Death, and he's killed in a specific way where his soul dies but his body doesn't. And that's this sort of explanation of why Godwin is rendered as this enormous sort of deformed monstrosity that is inside the Erd Tree. Doesn't really look like doesn't look like anything you see in game.
Yeah.
It actually has a fish tail, which I'm sure we're going to find out the origin of through data mining in 5 years or something. But point is, Godwin dies in a way that messes up the actual mechanics of death, because he's not entirely dead. His soul died, but his body lingers on as a sort of enormous hunk of rotting meat that is stuck in the Erd Tree that won't die. And when you go see him, there's flies everywhere. Because, even though he died an age ago, his body is still technically alive. He's like a zombie. He's like a giant hunk of meat that is just rotting and rotting and rotting but won't actually die. And this is what leads to, and this is a whole other discussion that we'll get to some other time, but it leads to the creation of what's called those who live in death. Because it creates this situation where okay, things don't have to be alive or dead anymore. They can be both. Godwin can be alive and dead. Golden Order does not like this. And there's actually a little reference later on to the actual interaction between the Golden Order and Destined Death is a lot more complex than you'd think, because it actually says Death was sort of the shadow of the Golden Order that was plucked from it. So they're actually related. And what happened to Godwin, it sort of revealed this contradiction within the Golden Order that it has trouble grappling with. The point is Marika, who's made it her mission essentially to understand the Golden Order, she's now in a position where the Golden Order is starting to not work properly. And that, I think, is why she breaks the ring. It's a combination of, it's grief, but it's also I don't know what's happening anymore. I have to take this thing apart and understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So this leads into the way in which characters relate to the Golden Order. Something about the Golden Order that I kind of signposted earlier is that, yes, the Golden Order is it's a religion, It's got clerics attending to it. It's got people trying to interpret its meaning. It has these old women who interpret the words of the fingers. It has people like D who are fanatical followers of the Golden Order who are killing everything that doesn't agree with it. Despite all of this, at the heart of the Golden Order is the concept of understanding the Golden Order. It's not something that you just believe in. It's actually a set of principles and ideas that are open to being interrogated, and they're open to being seen in different ways. I mentioned this earlier, but you have, for instance, you have D, you have Rogier, you have Goldmask, you have Corin, and you have Fear. And they're all interacting with the Golden Order in different ways. Fear's opposed to it, because she's one of the deathbed characters. She's obsessed with those who live in death. But you have Rogier. Rogier is very interested in how death works. He deliberately infects himself with death. He has a really interesting mechanic. They've never done this before, where you literally get to see Rogier's bloodstain as if he's a player. And he deliberately went down to where one of the Godwin effigy face things was and got killed by it, so that he could better understand death. And he actually says, I did this deliberately. Now that I'm suffused with death, I can understand death better. You have, Goldmask, who, when he learns Radagon is Marika, his response is to try to, synthesize an explanation for it. You have D, who just straight up, he's a fanatic. But he's fanatical in this interesting way, where they talk about, the depths of the Golden Order are all about learning. So all these characters, they're trying to learn and learn and learn about the Golden Order. Gideon Ofnir is another example. We'll just learn and learn and learn. And the fanatics of the Golden Order are the people who have basically learned enough to say, okay, now I know everything, and I'm going to stamp out everything that doesn't fit with what I know. But at the same time, you have characters who studied the Golden Order, and they say, well, the Golden Order is actually very malleable. Contradictory ideas can actually be worked into the Golden Order. Maybe the idea of those who live in death could become part of the Golden Order one day. If we sort of just reshape how we think of it. Very interestingly, Enya, the old lady at Round Table who talks to the fingers, she is sort of she serves the fingers who serve the Order, but she's very, very aware that the fingers in the Order, there's something that has to be interpreted by people. And it's all right to make your own decisions. There is a point at the end of the game where you're in a position where you're asked to burn down the Erd Tree. And Enya says to you, I'm paraphrasing, but she says, well, burning down the Erd Tree is terrible. You shouldn't do it, but if we wait for an answer from the greater will through the fingers, it might take years and years and years. The fingers are going to be communing with the will for so long that we may not have a chance, to fix things before they get an answer. And she says, sometimes you have to commit a sin. Maybe the world's been this way for too long. Maybe it's time to end it. And that's coming from someone whose literal job it is. Her sole purpose in life is to interpret the words of the fingers. So it's oh, all right. So there's all this stuff in there about the Golden Order is actually it's amenable to changes. It's like real religions do this, where scripture is reinterpreted and new ideas are sort of synthesized into it. Yeah. So going back to Marika, when Marika says, "I'm going to search the depths of the Golden Order," that's kind of what the Golden Order seems to want. It seems to want you have to understand the Golden Order. And there's all this talk, like I mentioned, of the principles of the Golden Order. You have regression and causality. Those are the two principles. And this is something that I think might become clearer when we get a fuller Japanese translation. And regression is the idea that everything is sort of being pulled toward one point. And causality is the idea that everything is connected. And you sort of have to operate within those two principles, but there's room to sort of change how you view the world within those two principles. Hi, Sophie here. As a qualified teacher who has to teach very, very long classes, or did before COVID happened, patreon.com. I'm here to remind you all that we're halfway through today's episode, so for health and safety reasons, you should all stretch and stay hydrated. So while we're all guarding ourselves against horrible lower back pain, I'm going to talk about something that I noticed in between us recording this episode and me recording this. And that is that when Radagon does his little shockwave smash thing with the hammer, you see a design that looks like a hand. The sort of point of impact is like it's a circular thing that represents the Golden Order, and there's these 5 radiating lines that come out. And I think that may represent like the Golden Order in the center, and that it's reaching out. It's branching out in the form of 2 fingers and 3 fingers. And as the fingers are the means by which the Golden Order communicates with the lands between, that sort of makes sense, I guess. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Not a particularly deep or profound insight, but had to be something to talk about while everyone looked after their posture. What other podcasts care about your posture like this? Probably, actually, quite a lot, because they all sold those mattresses. But that they were being paid to say that we just care about you. Hi to everyone who's new. So, Marika's whole, like, understanding the Golden Order thing, that in itself doesn't seem to be heretical. It's not like she's like, I'm going to reveal the charade behind the Golden Order. It's not like, the Golden Order is all mysticism, but I'm gonna, like, show you how it really works. The Golden Order is open about the fact it's not mysticism. It's open about the fact that it can be understood, and it is a series of principles by which you live, by which you understand the world. This is getting into a whole discussion about, like, the Golden Order as a kind of colonizing force. Because the Golden Order, like, it sent the Elden Ring from the sky. It sent it in the form of a star. And, like, again, it's all described in very mythic terms, but essentially Marika seems to have found or been possessed by that star, and that is what led to the world we have now. So, the Golden Order, it came from outside, and it came to a place that the Golden Order wasn't dominant in and was actually run by giants. And there were like astrologers who studied the stars. There was no Erdtree, and then that took over. We talked about this a little on the Scarlet Rod episode, but it's basically like it's a weed. It like landed in this world and started to take it over. And it's a colonizing force. Like, it is conquering and colonizing these worlds. And I think that is what they're getting at in the fight with the Elden Beast. Because you see in the distance all of these other Erdtrees. And I think the implication there is supposed to be that these are all other worlds that the Golden Order has landed an Erdtree on and taken it over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a colonizing force and you want to retain control, it helps to be malleable. It helps to be something that, like, can change itself to fit in with the people that you're colonizing, to fit in with the people that you're in control of. It's not going to work the same everywhere. So this all seems to be reasonable, like within what the Golden Order wants. Like, Marika wants to understand it. So it's like, all right, as long as the Golden Order remains in control, it doesn't matter if you kind of bend it a little bit. Where things go absolutely wrong is when she breaks the ring. When the ring actually breaks and the shattering happens, that's when the Greater Will pisses off.
Uh-oh.
It's the war between the demigods. There's a description. So it says here, now, the current imperfection of the Golden Order, or, and this is important, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods. That is the fly in the ointment. So, the Golden Order is imperfect, and it's imperfect and broken because of what the gods did. Right, so we know that much. It's not to do with understanding it, it's because the gods started squabbling over fragments of the ring. But what's really important is they say it's imperfect because the ideology of the Golden Order is now unstable. And if you look at all the demigods that are fighting, they all actually have a slightly different take on the Golden Order. So you have, like, Rykard, who just wants to get stronger and stronger and consume everything, but then you've got Mikola, who turns his back on the Golden Order because it can't treat Malenia, and you have Malenia, who is afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, and you have, like, Radagon, who is... I think Radagon might actually be trying to fix things. Like, there's this question about why is he stopping the stars again? And I honestly think he might be stopping the stars because when the stars start again, that's actually what allows Rani to, like, get access to Nokron and begin the Age of the Stars. So if Radahn had kept the stars from moving the whole time, the Age of the Stars wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be why he's holding them back. He's just trying to keep things roughly where they are. So, one more little point about becoming one with things and the perfection of the order is that there is an echo of Marika at the bottom of the lift of Dectus, and it says, "The Erd Tree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order or divest thyself of it. To wallow at the fringes a powerless upstart." So this seems to be getting back to the whole tarnished thing. You can either fully embrace and become one with the Golden Order, or if you don't want to be part of the Golden Order, fine, but you're just going to be on the fringe somewhere, you'll have no power, you'll be nothing. This notion of becoming one with the Order and then making something of yourself, that's also echoed in another thing that Marika says. This seems to be before the Shattering War begins. This seems to be when she gives fragments of the ring to the demigods, but before they start fighting. And she says, "Hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to be aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices." So I think that is her basically giving shards of the ring to the demigods and saying, become powerful, become something new. I don't think she knew the shattering was going to happen, but it kind of inevitably did. The shattering being the war. So it looks like what happened was she broke the ring, she gave the fragments of the ring to the demigods, without realizing they were going to fight each other. They started fighting each other, and that's when the Greater Will was like, okay, well, I'm out of here. I'm not protecting you anymore.
So they're instructions unclear, started a war.
Basically, yeah. Talking about this in chronological terms, they get the shards of the ring, then the war happens. So the war wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion when they got the shards of the ring. And it seems to, again, be kind of Marika's fault, because she basically says, become as powerful as you can, so of course they start fighting.
Yeah.
So, having established all of that junk, I want to quickly talk about, the way that the game is obsessed with twins, and the idea of, people either being twins, or having two identities, or being two people who are one person, or something like that. That's what I mean about Radagon and Marika being one. It's not actually that out of keeping with everything we've seen. So, a lot of characters in Elden Ring actually have two identities. When we meet Ranni, she calls herself Renna. She reveals herself to be Ranni later, but she's Ranni's ghost in a doll of Renna. So she's kind of two people. We actually find Ranni's real deal corpse later on, and it doesn't look anything like the doll.
No.
So Ranni, like Radagon and Marika, she's two people who's one person. She's Ranni, she's Renna, but she's Ranni. Another example would be Godfrey. When we meet Godfrey, he is the guy we know from the stories and the paintings, big guy with the lion on his back. Godfrey turns out to really be Hoaraloo. There's also a lot of incidents of characters just being twins, having a twin. So Morgott and Morg, they're twins. Yeah. Miquella and Malenia are twins. There's the twin maiden husks. There's no real reason logically for them to be twins, but they give you twin maiden husks anyway. You have the two fingers, they're a pair. They're the rational ones. The good ones are the two fingers. The bad ones are the three fingers, because you can't make a pair out of three. You have these incidents of people being bonded, being pair bonded, to people who aren't necessarily related to them, but there is a bond. So you have Ranni is bonded to Blythe. Yes, she also has Egi and Celavis, but she specifies Blythe was given to her. He's her hound who was given to her. You have Marika herself, she's also kind of bonded to Malekith. Malekith is her hound, he's her wolf. There's also a bunch of just twinned bosses, which is also it's a Souls thing, but in this you've got the Godskin duo, you have the Omen twins, you have twin examples of all sorts of things in this game. And the most overt one is D. So D is interesting because, Sin, do you know why he goes by D?
Because he's modeled after Vampire Hunter D?
Correct. But in the universe of Elden Ring, where Vampire Hunter D hasn't been invented yet, do you know why he goes by D?
Does it have something to do with Miyazaki's favorite anime?
Reborn.
D? Dying Will Bullet?
Hi to everyone who's new.
Late at night, I think of you, your vision floods my mind.
He's called D because he's actually two people and their names start with D. I think one is Darian and the other is like Darren or something like that. The point is like D is called D because D is two people. And D being two people, it's something that's really overt in the armor because literally the armor is two people fused together. But once you get the armor and you get the sword, you get a fuller like kind of story of what D is. And it says, the two known as D, so again, D is not one person, D is two people, are inseparable twins. They are of two bodies and two minds, but one soul. Not once do they stand together, not one word do they speak to one another.
Mhm.
So, specifically, two bodies, two minds, one soul. They're joined together. They're two people, but they're one person. And then we find out, later on, if we finish their quest line, it says, the inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them. So, the Golden Order, very accepting of them because they are two people who are one. The Golden Order is all about, like, things being sort of, like, opposed but also together, things being drawn together and pushed apart and connected.
Mhm. So, Sophie, with all of that in mind, let me tell you about Marika's hammer. The hammer tells us that it's a stone hammer made in the lands of the Newman, outside of the lands
Newman.
between. The tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring and Radagon attempted to repair it. The hammer partially broke upon shattering the ring, becoming splintered with rune fragments.
Alright, so I think it's really important that we understand that when Marika broke the ring, she was already one with Ratigan. That's why I went through the whole timeline thing with like when Godwin died, when the shattering happened, etc. Because my initial thought when I saw that was, oh, okay, Marika broke the ring, and then she went, oh shit. And then she is out, Radagon! And Ratigan showed up to try to fix it. And that's the genesis of the fusion, but the fusion happens before that. So that's why I wanted to establish early on that there was this timeline about exactly when the ring was shattered, when they got married, when Godwin died, etc., because they were already fused when the ring was shattered. It's not a case of like Marika broke the ring and then basically needed Ratigan to plug the holes in it. It's that they were already together when the ring broke. So when you talk about like Marika's breaking the ring, Ratigan's repairing the ring, that's probably happening at the same time.
Like in that trailer we saw in
Like in the trailer,
2019.
yeah. It's literally the scenario we see in the trailer where she's like, smash, and then it cuts back to Ratigan, and he's like, ooh dear, put it back together again. Nope, smash it. Oh, put it back together again. And that seems to kind of be like very in line with the Golden Order. There's like two principles, and everything is kind of connected and pulling together, but it's also like maybe going apart, and there's all this sort of like instability. So you can keep everything kind of stable if you're simultaneously breaking and repairing it. I think that's a big part of it. But I want to finish up by talking about like the notion of like where the Golden Order is at this point, where the ring is. So, something that Muriel brought up that I want to go back to is when he's like, why did she marry Ratigan? He's not that important. So, going back to the pillow talk, she says to him like, you are the hound of the Golden Order, you are loyal. She's ordering him to do it. She's not saying like, dear husband, I have a plan. What if we both fuse together? She's just saying like, you are my hound, you do what I say. We're going to fuse together and we're going to break the ring. And if you look across Marika's history, Lord, does she do that a lot. Like, she fucks over Malekith, she fucks over Hugh. The reason I brought up Godfrey earlier, she seems to fuck over Godfrey. She seems to be the one that tarnishes him. She's like, I'm going to take your grace away, just piss off now. At the moment, she seems terrible. It's possible there'll be some other reading of her later on where maybe she wasn't as bad, but from what we've seen, like, she's just betraying and using everyone constantly. And that, I think, is why she picks the guy who is not that important, the guy who is just her slave, who is just, like, her general who'll do what she tells him, because she's like, you're going to be my other half, the Golden Order's going to go into you, and we're going to do this thing, and you don't get a say in the matter. Right down to, like, he doesn't appear to want to leave Rennala. Like, Rennala's heartbroken. Rennala never recovers from him leaving. And it all seems to come down to, like, Radagon just can't say no. Because it's either like this, it's either a misplaced loyalty or maybe she has some kind of control over him. Which would kind of tie in with him being a giant, because Marika, like, placed a curse on the giants, so it may have carried on to Radagon, and she's like, okay, well, like, you do what I say. Again, going back to this thing here where she says, like, the Erdtree governs all, the choice is thine, become one with the order or divest thyself of it. I think the notion of choice there is interesting because, like, Godfrey is divested of his grace, presumably, like, Marika took it from him. And Godfrey / Horaloo, he's a very independently minded guy, like, from what we see of him. He's not really in Marika's thrall, he just wants to fight stuff. Like, when you talk to him, all he really cares about is, like, he's a character who doesn't see authority as coming from, like, anything other than power. He respects a crown because a crown is something you have to fight for. So he is someone who I think, like, maybe would not go along with Marika's plans as readily as Radagon would. Radagon, in contrast, basically, like, he does what he's told. Like, Godfrey is not a hound. Godfrey is Horaloo. Godfrey is like Conan the Barbarian. He goes out, he fights and fights and fights, and he just wants to get stronger. Again, I think it's important when you encounter Godfrey in the game, he is not guarding the Erdtree. I know he might seem like but he's not. He's just there. He's there and he's eulogizing Morgoth, who is probably his son. And you walk in on him when he's cradling Morgoth, and he basically says, like, I'm back to get what's mine, meaning the grace from within the Elden Ring. And the reason he fights you is because he wants to prove that he is the strongest. He wants to prove he is the best, prove he is worthy of being Elden Lord by beating up everybody else. Radagon's not like that. Radagon is literally called Radagon of the Golden Order because he is just doing what the Golden Order tells him.
So could have Marika kicked out Godfrey because he didn't want to fuse?
I think that may actually be it. That, like, Godfrey was too independently minded. Because she says, the choice is thine, become one with the order or divest thyself of it. Godfrey was divested of it. Radagon becomes one with it to the point where, like, when you encounter Radagon, Marika does not have the Elden Ring in her. She is like an empty husk. She breaks apart, falls down, Radagon gets up, and as Radagon's getting up, the Elden Ring appears inside of him. So he has it, she doesn't. But then when you defeat the Elden Beast and you put Marika's body back together, she gets the ring back in her. So something about the Order went into Radagon. That's why he's Radagon of the Golden Order. To sort of, like, try to make sense of everything. Radagon, Marika, completely different people, to start with. Marika seems to want to fuse with someone. There is this whole recurring thing of, like, two people or one person, you can have two bodies and one soul. The Golden Order is all about, like, perfection. It's about, like, we have to remove all instabilities, things like that. So her wanting to fuse with someone seems to be part of, like, helping her understand the Golden Order, or perhaps to do with breaking the Elden Ring, I don't know. Godfrey apparently doesn't want to be part of that. Godfrey loses his grace. The asterisk there is that he seems to lose his grace when he runs out of people to kill. Marika divests him of his grace. I don't know specifically if it's to do with, like, she divests him, like, literally when he runs out of people to kill, or if he says no to her when she's like, we should probably fuse at some point. He's like, no.
And then she's like, well, then I think we should see other people.
Yes. Radagon is a replacement for Godfrey because Radagon, he's like the anti-Godfrey in a lot of ways. Godfrey is all about, like, individual strength, like, I am the Lord because I have killed everyone. I am the most powerful. My authority comes from my crown, which I won through strength. Contrast, Radagon is a loyal dog. Radagon does what he's told. That, I think, is the genesis of why she picks Radagon, because she needs someone who basically won't answer back, who will do what he is, even if he thinks it's the wrong thing to do. And from what we can tell, he probably did think it was the wrong thing to do because Renala's heartbroken. And, like, Radagon doesn't seem that happy. So she fuses with him. Thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god. They fuse together. They have 2 children. The children are both born with something wrong with them, presumably because their parents are fused together now. There's, like, bits and pieces missing, so one's a child forever, one has a horrible disease. So they're fused now, and then some point after that, presumably as a result of Godwin dying, she breaks the ring. He tries to fix the ring. This might have happened simultaneously. And if it did happen simultaneously, that would sort of make a lot of sense, because the whole, like, notion of, like, the Golden Order and the ring and everything is, like, all these things have to be balanced. There's all these, like, twinned things, like two people that share one soul. There's two principles that underline it. The two fingers are, like, the good ones because they're in balance, because there's two of them. The principles that underline the order, like, they're actually about, like, the fact that everything's connected and everything kind of goes back to one point. So them being fused, it does make sense, like that. But exactly what it accomplishes is, like, kind of a question mark. I think the fact that when you encounter them, Marika does not have the Elden Ring in her, and Ratigan does, even though they're the same person, it might actually have been a way for Marika to sort of maintain something of the Golden Order within her, even when she destroyed it or lost it, because she's also fused with Radigan, who does have it. And then, of course, when that's over, when Radigan is dead, she gets it back again. But there's all this stuff in there about, like, becoming one with the Golden Order. And this is to do with this, like, concepts we're told about regression and causality. So regression, the idea behind regression is, like, everything is sort of pulling toward one point. So two people, they're fused together, they're pulling toward one point, sort of makes sense. And the other is causality. The idea behind causality is that everything is connected. If there's this giant sort of, like, web of connections all through the world, everything is one. So again, everything's one, two people become one person. May actually explain something about the Elden Ring. If, like, she's breaking it, he's fixing it, it's locked in stasis, kind of. That's one way of maybe looking at it, that, like, if you simultaneously break and repair the ring as two different people, you keep things kind of stable. But yeah, there's so much, like, going on in it that we're probably going to be talking about this a while.
And Sophie, you mentioned that Marika wanted to understand how the Order works.
Yeah.
If she wanted to do that, why didn't she just go to Dignity City?
So, hi to everyone new.
Sophie, do the outro.
That was the Snack Covenant episode 293, Marika and Radagon and Marika.
Or Maragon and Radica.
Maragon sounds like a spice.
Like Spice Spice Baby.
That's Ice Ice Baby.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
And thank you everyone for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye!
Hello! As the Dignity City mascot, I have been reviewing the many applications that we have received ever since our new YouTube advertising campaign began. And I cannot tell a lie, the quality of the applications has been sorry, the podcast is over. Have a good day, everybody, and hello to everyone who is new.